Before we get back to creating our express routes, we're going to take a quick moment to explore a feature of Postman that's going to make it a lot easier to switch between your local environment and the Heroku application. This is called Postman environments. Now, in order to illustrate this, I am going to start up my local server by running node server.js. And over inside of Postman, we're going to start making a few requests. Now, if you remember, in the last video, we made a request to our Heroku application. I click send on the get to-dos URL, and I get the to-dos back as expected. The problem is that over here, the actual items saved in the collection, they all use that localhost URL, and there's no good way to switch between the two. To fix this issue, we're going to create environments, one for our local machine and one for Heroku. This is going to let us create a variable as the URL, and we can change that variable by flicking a switch over here in the environments dropdown. To illustrate exactly how this is going to work, I am going to be copying the Heroku URL right now. Then I'm going to head over to the No Environment dropdown and click Manage Environments. Here we currently have none, but we can go ahead and add two. The first environment I'm going to call To-Do App Local. This is going to be the local to-do application, and we can set up a set of key value pairs. Now, the only key we're going to set is URL. We're going to set a localhost URL for the To-Do App Local environment, and we'll set the Heroku URL for the To-Do App Heroku environment, which we'll create in just a second. Right here, localhost 3000. We're leaving off paths because that is going to depend on the individual route. I'm going to go ahead and add that environment. Then we can create a second one. This one will be called To-Do App Heroku, and we're going to set the URL key once again. This time, though, we're setting it equal to the value I copied to the clipboard. This is the Heroku application URL. I'm going to add that. Now we have our two environments, and I can close that window manager. I'm going to close all of my tabs, and I'm not going to make any changes by saving. Then I'm going to go to Get To-Dos. Now, currently, Get To-Dos automatically fetches from localhost. What we're going to do is replace the URL, everything before the slash, with the following syntax, which will look similar if you're familiar with any templating engines. Two curly braces, followed by the variable name, URL, followed by two closing braces. This is going to inject the URL right here, meaning that the get to-dos request is now dynamic. We can change which endpoint it requests from, localhost or Heroku, based on the environment. I'm going to save this request and fire it off. And you'll notice when you try to fire this request, we get an error. It's trying to make a request to a URL that starts with the curly braces. This is the encoded character, URL, the closing curly braces, and to-dos. That's because the URL variable is currently not defined. We need to switch to an environment. Over in the environments list, we now have To-Do App Heroku and To-Do App Local. If I click To-Do App Local and send that request off, what do I get? I get my two items in the local database. If I switch over to To-Do App Heroku, this is going to make a request to the Heroku application. It's going to be updating this URL, and when I fire it off, we get a different set of data. This time around, all we have is our one to-do item, the one that's available on the Heroku application. With this in place, Get To-Dos can now easily be used to fetch localhost or Heroku items, and we can do the same thing with our Post To-Dos request. Right here, I'm going to replace the URL with curly braces, and inside of those curly braces, we'll have the URL variable. Now I can go ahead and save this request, fire it off, and it's going to make a new to-do on the Heroku application. If I switch to the local environment, we can fire that off, and now we have a new to-do on the local environment. The last request to change is going to be the Get To-Dos by ID request. We're going to take that localhost 3000 once again. Then we're going to go ahead and replace it with URL just like this, and now we are done. We can save the request, and we can go ahead and fire it off. Now this one has a second variable. This is the actual to-do ID. You could add this as a variable as well. For now though, since it's going to change as we add and delete to-dos, I'm going to simply grab one from the local database, move into the Get To-Dos request, swap it out here, and send it off. And we get our to-do back. If I make it a to-do object ID that doesn't exist, By changing one of the numbers to 6, we get a 404. Everything is still working as expected, and it's also going to work on the Heroku environment. I'm going to fetch all the to-dos on the Heroku environment, grab one of the IDs, move to the getToDo by ID request, swap out the ID, send it off, and we get the to-do item. Hopefully you're starting to see why these Postman environments are so convenient. You can easily switch between two environments, changing exactly what happens to the request. Now in this case, we happen to only have one variable, URL. You could add others, and we will a little bit later. For now though, that is it. We have a way to swap between the two environments inside of Postman. Now that we have this in place, we're going to move back into the Atom editor, and we're going to start adding new routes. There's 2 more to go. In the next video, you're going to learn how to delete to-dos by ID. That's coming up next, so stay tuned. I will see you then.